So I love Dragon Ball. I hope my previous video on the topic appropriately relayed that fact. In preparation for that video, I watched and read all of that original Dragon Ball run, plus all the animated and live-action movies. I really wanted to get into one of my favorite stories, and that means I also wanted to talk about one of my favorite stories and all the adaptations I could get into in the amount of time I had. So that's what I'm doing here, just talking about all the Dragon Ball media I mentioned earlier. I'd love to know what everyone else thinks about these individual arcs in these movies. Just do your best to not be like a Red Ribbon Army grunt or anything.
Roshi, help me!
March, this will help.
I'll do what you say.
I'm watching you, man. Don't try anything funny. Just... Hey, watch it, sweetheart. You don't want to break my concentration.
I'll break a lot more than that.
The Emperor Pilaf Saga. Completely 100% good-natured boyo Son Goku is minding his own fucking business when he is hit by horny teenager Bulma, who can't get a boyfriend and wants to steal his property, taking advantage of Goku's good nature in order to use him as a bodyguard as the pair jump from an adventure and new companion to an adventure and new companion, hunting down the MacGuffin balls faster than a little goblin and his legally distinct Team Rocket. This first little introductory arc is famously a loose adaptation of the classic Eastern tale Journey to the West, crammed to the brim full of Akira Toriyama's unique brand of whimsy, crude humor, character designs, and while the franchise would most become synonymous with action sequences, Toriyama's storytelling continues to translate as excellently to animation as ever. Because the storytelling and panel design is constantly moving and so inventive, even the limited animation we get from the earlier anime is easy to miss. Something is always happening, and that makes for exciting and fun sequences throughout the entire show. Depending on whether you watch the dub or the original language version, your mileage may vary, but I've always found the English voice cast to be more than adequate across the board, despite having to remind myself that Oolong is supposed to be 10 and he has the voice of like a 30-year-old with a smoking habit. But I do fully believe that the original Japanese cast brings far more emotion and nuance to the roles in the long run, with a much better soundtrack to boot. This is as original Dragon Ball as you can get, but looking back on the series as a whole, it definitely stands out, since the theming would immediately shift from this fun little adventure to a more action-focused story. While maintaining that original tone and whimsy, these characters are what would prove lasting, and either watching or reading how they first came together continues to be a really superb experience. Oh, and Fight of the Arc, Goku vs. Yamcha, I think this is an arc less about action and solid fights and more about its fun moments. The 21st Tournament Saga. Our genuinely kind monkey boy son Goku has had his entire worldview shattered time and time again by magic and technology, but really would rather just hang out with his grandpa's pervy old teacher and get jacked, until he's ready to fight in the Tournament Saga that essentially started Tournament Saga tropes in the manga and the anime industry. Fighting old friends and old friends and old friends and wait. Who's that Jackie Chun guy? And people who will never be important again. Abandoning its roaming adventure to focus purely on its characters and action works in the story's benefit, letting Toriyama shine in what he does best, giving us structure to watch our characters clearly progress and grow, a goal that we will be shooting for throughout the next 7 arcs, and situations in which every character has a point to bounce off one another in ways only they can. The increase in action also forces the animation to step up its game across the board, resulting in some sequences that continue to stand out in the Dragon Ball franchise today. If Toriyama had to pivot to this original Tournament Saga to save the ratings, then it did just that, and for good reason. The built-in setting lets the tone subtly shift into something with more serious character implications, even if that would be just winning the tournament to be the best. It allows all the character whimsy and the magic in the world to remain intact while keeping the character-driven humor that Toriyama loves and the action that the franchise would become synonymous with. And Fight of the Arc is definitely Goku vs. Jackie Chun by far. The Red Ribbon Army Saga. Goku has just been named the second best fighter in the world, his martial arts teacher of 8 months. Again, he just got Goku jacked. Does that make Roshi more of a personal trainer than a martial arts instructor? His personal trainer of 8 months has admitted he has nothing else to teach this preteen and sets him out into the world, where he promptly runs into an army hell-bent on capturing our titular MacGuffins for their own fucking reasons, kidnapping a town and forcing our solo protag into a multi-level muscle tower of death, where Goku's roaming adventure apparently didn't work before for audiences, I think here it works perfect, and evidently it worked well enough as Toriyama's editors let him run with the Red Ribbon Army saga over several arcs. Our protag's fish out of water naivety is not lost for a moment as he travels from town to town unabated from ignoring cultural taboos by a wider cast of friends. This humor shines perhaps in this upcoming arc than it did previously, as it's 30% less pervy and better than any future saga, as the growth Goku ultimately shows throughout has to be abandoned to make the same joke decades later down the line in Super. This is the first part of the anime that gets significant filler, if that is how you are consuming the story, giving us a little more Colonel Silver, Pilaf, as well as the Ox King and Chi-Chi was never a problem for me, but it is very clear when the filler begins and when it ends. It is most noticeable as the main story just stops abruptly for a side quest, and it just doesn't have the same structure or quality of something lifted directly from Toriyama. With or without the filler, the Red Ribbon Army saga is the first arc in what is maybe my personal favorite Dragon Ball saga in the entire franchise, that being the Red Ribbon Army saga. Fight of the arc is definitely going to go to Goku vs. Nature Metallatron, I guess, or Murasaki for being so fun. The General Blue Saga. Goku has been fighting through the rainbow that is the Red Ribbon Army leadership and now needs to make a pit stop to fix that MacGuffin we used to find the MacGuffins, picking up a few members of our supporting cast for this saga as well. The closest Red Ribbon Army leader nearby is General Blue, now tasked with finding both the MacGuffins and the MacGuffin we used to find the MacGuffins. He's also the most dangerous person Goku has had to deal with so far. Oh, and there's a pirate backdrop, and we get Dragon Ball's first crossover when General Blue runs away and ends up in Penguin Village. Adding back to the expanded Dragon Ball cast lets us see how much Goku grows in his understanding of the world between the arcs and their interactions. Whether this specific arc works for you is probably going to depend on how much you like Bulma and Krillin, as well as how much Roshi you can handle since he is at his worst here. But everyone included does get something to do and engage in what is going on throughout the arc, seeding a little bit more of the future arcs than Toriyama has done in the past. The Penguin Village crossover is also not my favorite, and it's not that I don't appreciate Dr. Slump or Goku in Dr. Slump, I just don't appreciate General Blue in Dr. Slump. I much prefer Aralé's later crossover in Dragon Ball Super, where Vegeta makes a much better straight man than General Blue by far. Wait. This arc does an excellent job of increasing the danger Goku is in. Throughout the previous arc, Goku, while sometimes put in a situation, never feels out of his depth, where General Blue is distinctly trying to push Goku under. We have seen Goku and Krillin tank gunfire before, but Blue sells blowing a child's head up with a shotgun too well for it to not be taken seriously. This also might be the best way to escalate the story that was started in the previous arc, bringing in a few old characters while increasing the sense of danger. Fight of the arc for me, though, is Roshi vs. Captain Dark and Company. It stands out, and I never loved General Blue's fights in general.
Lost, he's not moving, you got him. Come on, let's go in the house.
You big sissy.
The Commander Red Saga. Goku bounces back pretty much immediately after a minor loss from General Blue, but don't worry about him. He is busy getting tongue-fucked by our new big antagonist for this arc, Mercenary Tao. After our favorite Sun Wukong stand-in saves some indigenous land of Koreans? Indigenous Koreans? The aforementioned mercenary shows up and absolutely ruins Goku's day so hard he has to take a quick training session to bounce back again. And this is going to become a running theme as the arcs get more serious going forward. Ultimately, Goku gets to meet the Big Red in the Red Ribbon Army and prove he is a weapon of mass destruction. Unlike in the General Blue Saga, where our lead is vaguely a little out of his depth, here Goku is truly fucked going into the second act of this arc, complete with the first real fake-out death cliffhanger in the series. This little story cycle is going to become the big one that we would see time and time again throughout not just Dragon Ball, but all shonen stories going forward. It works so well in the Commander Red Saga because it is as fresh as it is, and the training portion pays off really well, much better than the very next time Toriyama plays with the structure again. After we deal with Mercenary Tao, the big sense of danger is gone and doesn't come back until the King Piccolo Saga. But the pure catharsis of Goku running amok and murdering the entire Red Ribbon Army in broad daylight makes up for it for me. It's deadly serious danger followed by fun murder that maybe should end the Red Ribbon Army saga as a whole thematically, but Toriyama had one of the most emotional epilogues he wanted to deliver yet in the Fortuneteller Baba saga. And I know a lot of people probably love the fight with Tao, but my personal favorite act of violence in this arc is Goku's rampage with the Red Ribbon Army base. The Fortuneteller Baba Saga. The larger Red Ribbon Army saga, or Goku's second quest for the Dragon Balls, comes to an end completely divorced from the larger threat that loomed over the previous 3 arcs. Right out of this scuffle with the remains of the Red Ribbon Army, our protagonist is told the only way to find the last MacGuffin is by fighting in a random-ass fighting ladder with Roshi's older sister, who primarily uses stock Universal horror monsters to do her bidding with the exception of a single encounter particularly personal to Goku. This always felt like a really odd way to end this adventure, it having virtually nothing to do with what came before never felt particularly satisfying to me, even if this has one of the highest emotional peaks in the entirety of the Dragon Ball franchise. The fights throughout this arc are also all over the place, either way too funny and full of gags or well choreographed but weirdly dark for the circumstances. The Devil's Toilet feels like it exists just to manufacture danger, since this is the end of the second Dragon Ball adventure and our lead just fought a literal army. What works though, works as well as it always has in Toriyama's work. Well thought out action sequences that flow beautifully, especially paired with competent animation. Again as well, the finale is perhaps the best pulled off by the creator as far as emotional impact goes. A moment still called back to years later in Dragon Ball Super, a moment that always left me wanting a little more Grandpa Gohan in the franchise when death becomes meaningless. Oh yeah, and Pilaf showed up too for a minute at the end there too, didn't he? Fight of the arc is easily going to go to Grandpa Gohan versus Goku, the most emotionally packed fight in all of Dragon Ball. The 22nd Tournament Saga. After he saved the day and just ran off into the distant at the end of the last saga, we either pick up at the start of the next World Martial Arts Tournament, if you read the manga, or you get a little bit of filler to fill in Goku's time watching the anime, which I largely do not mind. In fact, you get a little filler sprinkled throughout this entire animated arc. Mostly little bits of world building and side stories instead of stretching fights and action sequences, but when we do get into the second tournament saga of Dragon Ball, the crux of the conflict becomes Master Roshi's old rival and the big reveal that one of the bad guys Goku obliterated back when fighting the Red Ribbon Army was a cherished abuser. I mean a mentor to the big tournament rival for Goku this time around. You are definitely going to be hit or miss on the filler. I appreciate the little bits of world building, especially Launch's little adventure. The real fun of this arc comes again in Toriyama's action choreography, showing just how creative he is on the completely blank canvas of a fighting ground. Is one of my favorite things about Dragon Ball. Tien is also the closest thing we get to a big bad this arc, but his presence as an actual danger dissipates greatly as soon as his master is out of the picture. But this arc is also primarily set up for the big story beats that immediately change the tone of the series going forward. Full of great action sequences with the introduction of a few key players for the rest of the original Dragon Ball run, it makes for an arc that might get a little more lost in the background compared to other story-focused arcs. Even the first World Tournament saga feels like it had some sort of important character throughline for Goku. This feels like a particularly long but fun weekend for our favorite hillbilly. Fight of the tournament is going to Jackie Chun versus Tien for me. It's a little more serious, and I find it a little more fun than Tien's final bout with Goku. The King Piccolo Saga. After one of the best cliffhangers and transitions between arcs, our normal, lighthearted, loving protagonist is enraged, weak, and wanting revenge. Lucky, the villain we are hunting for revenge is also hunting the MacGuffins we know how to track. The Dragon Ball B team just has to hold their ground and survive long enough for Goku to power up and swoop in to save the day. This is an arc that would set the groundwork for the story outline Akira Toriyama would rely on going forward. I think to Dragon Ball's detriment for the most part. Not that I don't think it would be done well or better in the future, just that Toriyama relies on it a little too much. If you're watching the anime, this arc also has a lot of that filler I mentioned previously. The filler that is just extending action sequences by putting in long chase sequences and visual noise behind the characters running around until the plot can resume. Even recycling animation to pad out the runtime. When the plot does get back on track, you get a few great action sequences that are intense as one of Dragon Ball's most iconic villains chews the scene and wreaks havoc. There are a few non-fillery plot points I don't love, like Goku's unearned through training power-up and Yajirobe existing in general, really, but the beatdowns our protagonist ultimately delivers is excellent catharsis to the arc that most people generally know early Dragon Ball for. It's the arc that the big-budget live-action movie would try and adapt. The action sequence of the arc is going to have to go to that catharsis I mentioned before in the final Goku vs. King Piccolo bout. The filler training arc. Okay, on this watch through, I felt that the little 6 episodes between King Piccolo and the 23rd World Tournament arc stood out a little more than it had in the past. It's just a few episodes where Goku trains with Mr. Popo in a room that pretty much lets you virtual reality time travel. So Goku gets to meet Roshi's master without mucking with history, while B-Team has their own little adventure to save a town from a volcano. It doesn't change any way we see Tien, Chaozu, Yamcha, or Krillin. Nobody feels written out of character. We just get a little more time with the B-Team getting to be heroes in their own right, and getting to follow through when their plan doesn't immediately succeed. It doesn't feel like the team that put these episodes together took them any less seriously, with lots of original animation and a few original fights. Speaking of which, both Goku and Krillin have entertaining fights in this little arc that nobody talks about. Goku versus Popo's little Goku doll, and Krillin versus a random village dude are both low stakes but fun. The 23rd World Tournament Saga, or the Piccolo Jr. Saga. The opening of everyone arriving at the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai is the perfect way to set the mood for the final arc of the original Dragon Ball saga. As far as breaking down the plot, it's another World Tournament saga. Except the stakes are essentially world-ending, as a stronger reincarnation of Piccolo is here to compete because he likes to put on a show and have a big reveal for thematics. This final arc is really simple plot-wise, but makes up for it in every way with how dense it is with character. For the first time, every fight in the tournament has significant story or character ramifications. Even funny fights like Yamcha versus Hero or Goku versus Anonymous end up significant for the arc, or at least the series going forward. Speaking of, in both anime and manga form, the fights are maybe the best choreographed they have been in the entire series, before and after this moment. There is also virtually no fluff in the anime once the arc proper starts, all the way until the end as far as I can tell anyway. As an individual arc, this might be the best Toriyama has put to page. Everyone is rich with character throughout the arc itself, as well as building off arcs that came before. With the exception of maybe Turtle and Ox King, nobody is forgotten in appearance here, and everyone fighting definitely gets a moment. Even most of the non-combatants get an individual time to shine as well. Fight of the arc, and arguably the series, has to go to Goku vs. Piccolo Jr. here, right? But I also want to shine a light on Krillin's run against Piccolo as well. I always like that little combat. The Epilogue Engagement Party arc. Okay, so I know I said the 23rd World Tournament had no fluff, but that's because, like the little training arc before, I've chosen to separate Goku and Chi-Chi's little post-tournament fetch quest into its own little section here, where in preparations for their wedding, the Ox King gets caught up in the middle of a burning castle, so Goku finally goes on a quest for a MacGuffin that he was told was destroyed back during the Pilaf saga. While I prefer where the manga ends with Goku and Chi-Chi flying off into the camera, until we see them in chapter 195, and all of the world building is complete nonsense in what is revealed immediately after in Dragon Ball Z, this is a cute little epilogue that is harmless character-wise. I love that we get more Ox King, Fortuneteller Baba, Turtle, and especially Grandpa Gohan. I still cannot believe with all the exploration of the afterlife we do going forward, Grandpa Gohan is not seen once again after this point. Again, this isn't really an arc about fights, but Goku fighting a giant deity towards the end is pretty fun. Dragon Ball Curse of the Blood Rubies. Completely 100% innocent child Goku is minding his own fucking business when he's hit by horny teenager Bulma, who can't get her boyfriend and wants to steal his property, but is beaten to it by a couple of soldiers who want the same MacGuffins so their boss can cure his polyphagia. As in Goku and company literally getting together and recycling plot points and jokes. In the other half, Red Ribbon Army Saga. You know, army harassing a small village looking for Dragon Balls for a relatively inconsequential wish. And we are watching the 2010 Funimation dub, so your mileage will obviously vary depending on the version you have available. The cast all sound close enough not to cause any crazy juxtaposition with what fans of the original series might expect, but all bring enough to stand out a touch in their own characterizations. While the animation is either a touch more nuanced or has better shadowing and a brighter palette, I honestly can't really tell. I don't think I have the best eye for this kind of nuance in animation, but at the very least it felt a little more quality than the Dragon Ball anime. If the one is a fan of the original anime and doesn't mind fucking around with continuity, this is not the worst way to experience the original Dragon Ball gang getting together in 50 minutes or less. If one is on or vaguely familiar with the series and this is somehow your jumping on point, I think it's a great way to get a feel for what the series is about in tone, style, and action. But definitely check out the original series from the start all the same. And we continued our adventure with Dragon Ball with Sleeping Princess in the Devil's Castle, deciding to pick up right after where Goku would have ruined Emperor Pilaf's wish for the first time in the canon timeline. This movie tells an alternate story of Goku and Krillin's first adventure. And unlike the other Dragon Ball movies, this is less of a straightforward adaptation of one or multiple specific arc, as it is just an alternative path that Goku and Krillin could have gone down on their first story. One that also ends up including more of the main cast if you missed them. Our preteen heroes want to learn martial arts, but are first tasked with bringing home one of animation's biggest sex offenders a piece of ass for him to stare at. Instead of fighting some pigs who, in fairness, were right in the original story, we let Goku lay siege, running headfirst into a tropey yet fun monster castle. The Devil's Castle, to be precise. This time with Yamcha, Bulma, Puar, and Oolong hanging around as well. Again, to compare to the other Dragon Ball movies, this one is easily the one where the animation stands out for mostly all the reasons you wouldn't want it. Just about everything feels one step back from what it would have been doing in the anime at the time. It also took this cast much longer of a time to grow on me personally. Even if everyone was on character, there were just too many odd moments and odd line readings for it to feel right. Again, this is a fun alternative take to an adventure in the Dragon Ball canon that sets a good tone for what the Dragon Ball series was about at the time. This has a lot of value in its new characters and story, but is a little more supplemental in the long run. Dragon Ball. The mystical adventure. In an alternate Dragon Ball timeline, the Emperor's advisor is collecting MacGuffins for his own machination, terrorizing villages just as an annual tournament is starting. This is where Goku comes into the story. Kind of. Not really. He's just introduced. Because more importantly, the last MacGuffin is in the hands of the best dad reminiscent of indigenous Americans in an entirely fictional world. But Best Dad bumps into Goku just as he's about to get caught by the Emperor's crew, when everyone decides they'd rather fight in that tournament instead. A whole lot is crammed into this 45 minutes, managing to shove in a lot of both tournament arcs and the entire Red Ribbon Army, minus the Fortuneteller Baba shenanigans, into this short of a runtime is not easy. Recasting several characters to be in charge of the Red Ribbon Army stand-in works magnificently and makes for some more complex character dynamics that you don't get in the original story, especially for Chaozu and Tien. Reorganizing the entire story into under an hour also lets us have some interesting fights and character interactions that we haven't seen anywhere else. Out of the original 3 Dragon Ball anime features, this has, by far, the most crisp animation. Set on some very original, yet still very Dragon Ball in style set designs. For this we watched the original Japanese dub, but I know if you watch the English dub, a lot of the classic Dragon Ball voice cast does return, with the exception of a new Goku that took me a second to warm up to. Dragon Ball The Mystical Adventure might cram so much in that it might not be as good of a jumping on point to Dragon Ball as the previous 2 movies, but easily has the most to offer to anyone who likes their classic Dragon Ball and wants to see something different. 1996, Dragon Ball, The Path to Power. Completely 100% good-natured boyo Son Goku is minding his own fucking business when he is attacked by a horny teenager, Bulma, who can't get a boyfriend and wants to steal the boy's property. Taking advantage of Goku's good nature, Bulma uses him as a bodyguard as the pair jump from adventure and new companion to adventure and new companion, hunting down the MacGuffin balls faster than the army of color-coded muscle goons working for a short little ginger. The Path to Power might actually be the perfect amalgamation of multiple arcs crammed into one. This is certainly my favorite retelling of that original adventure Goku went on, especially because it includes so much of my favorite Dragon Ball saga, that being the Red Ribbon Army saga. The feature was animated from the ground up to be as crisp and show how much production value a Dragon Ball movie could have. That crisp new animation is the weirdest thing to get used to as well, since Goku is definitely not on model to the original Dragon Ball, avoiding the round character designs for the thinner, streamlined models that were being used during Dragon Ball GT. Unless you are the most devout of purists, though, this is one of the best ways to experience any Dragon Ball story, especially if you want to capture the magic of early franchise Dragon Ball. 2009's Dragon Ball Evolution. When I started the Dragon Ball Marathon, I was committed to finally putting this on after having it in my DVD collection unopened since 2010. In this version of Dragon Ball, we follow 50% good-natured, 50% horny Teen Goku avenge his grandfather from the Namekian alien Piccolo and track down the titular MacGuffins with a girl on the same quest so she can become famous. Getting over being an awkward, clumsy, badass, dumb, adorable, hot martial arts master while adventuring from set piece to set piece and new companion to new companion while Piccolo's minions chase. All around, this adaptation feels like it was made by someone who was told secondhand what Dragon Ball was by a friend and didn't pay any attention. If you squint really hard and stand at the far end of the room, it kind of resembles a Dragon Ball. But really, everyone has shit on this movie in every way imaginable. From what I understand, the cast did take the production really seriously, despite realizing they were tricked into the production by promises of bigger production staff and bigger budgets. Everyone does bring a lot of fun energy to some really awkward lines, and I really do enjoy the Master Roshi Goku fight in the Not Kami House. Not as much as any of the fights in the anime, but like, I can appreciate it. Dragon Ball. Fight Son Goku, win Son Goku. Also known as Dragon Ball Zero. The second live-action Dragon Ball adaptation is probably the most faithful to the source material, more so than even most of the animated movies, sticking pretty close to the story's beats of the Emperor Pilaf saga from the original Dragon Ball series, in which our little protagonist is minding his own fucking business when he's assaulted and shot at by Bulma, who wants to steal his property and can't get a boyfriend. Taking advantage of Goku's good nature in order to use him as a bodyguard as the pair jump from new adventure to new adventure and new companion to new companion, hunting down the MacGuffins faster than a little goblin and his weirdly armored henchmen. Being such a straightforward retelling, that makes this maybe the worst adaptation of the classic tale Journey to the West I have ever experienced. But at this point, the story has been filtered through so many lenses that is clearly not the point anymore. It is just weird that this is technically an adaptation. The biggest changes of this story come in a few additional fights with the Ox King and Emperor Pilaf himself, neither of which is particularly good, but hey, they tried. Despite being under 2 hours in length, this version of the Pilaf saga feels longer than the 5.5 you would have spent watching the anime. Definitely worth watching if you want to see Poir smoke cigarettes or just like seeing other adaptations, but please don't ask me to watch this again. Dragon Ball The Magic Begins. Pretty cool kid Monkey Boy is minding his own fucking business after hanging out with his grandpa when he is hit by a jeep driven by a horny teenager Sito who can't get a boyfriend and wants to steal his property, but is beaten to it by a couple of space soldiers who want the same MacGuffin so their boss can rule the world. Let the plot ensue as the protag and sidekick hunt down the MacGuffins and build their own little team. At the point in time this was released, it almost comes off as like a live-action remake of Curse of the Blood Rubies, but with a legally distinct Demon King in lieu of a legally distinct Booyang. We even defeat the big bad in virtually the same way. And this is such an incredibly low-budget production that every penny went into vaguely well-choreographed fights with a few wire stunts at the expense of nearly everything else. I was able to find an English dub on YouTube since the version on Tubi is unsubtitled for me for some reason, and I think the version I saw has been pretty widely circulated, but for some reason the audio tracking becomes unsynced about an hour into the movie, and that kind of killed the last hour outside of just watching some fun action sequences. Before that tracking issue made it virtually impossible to understand what everybody was saying, I thought the dub performances even were not terrible. Not all of them. Some of them were not great, but across the board I didn't hate them. But, with low expectations, everything's a little better than what we were waiting for, right? And not that it doesn't lack some charm, there is an earnest effort here that does translate in some degree, just not very much. This should not be anybody's introduction to Dragon Ball, and it probably is not worth checking out for most people as a whole, because it does not represent the franchise particularly well, but it is certainly an unlicensed micro-budget adaptation that exists. TotallyNotMark's Dragon Ball Review and Retrospective. There's far less original Dragon Ball content on the internet than I would like, especially breaking down the series. If you're unfamiliar with TotallyNotMark, he is the self-described manga guy. And I don't know anyone who has studied the medium and its history more than Mark. His work has always been ethical, and he has bent over backwards to promote the series, despite Toei adamantly fighting his work to do so. Mark's review and retrospective of the original Dragon Ball run is a little more unforgiving than I prefer, especially when it comes to the anime, but I do find his critiques to almost always be on point in one aspect or another. If you want to understand more about history and the specific art form and stylings of Akira Toriyama and plenty other mangakas, TotallyNotMark's channel is probably one of the best places to look. And yeah, thank you so much for enjoying my journey through all of the original Dragon Ball media I could get my hands on. Well, I mean, not the video games, that's a different beast entirely to cover that I don't think I could even do on my own. If you do need more context towards my feels, if you do need more context about my feels towards the original Dragon Ball series, I did a video earlier this month that is just more about my feels and answering questions and other things about what we just covered. And every Monday I am just talking about what we watched the week prior, and next month is October, so it's slashers all the way down. The last thing I have to say before I sign off is just be kind out there, go make blue-haired Launch proud.